Dragon Ball Project Age 1000 isn't just a reference to the original game Dragon Ball Online, but it's also a clear direction of where the Xenoverse series is headed, as it takes many plot points, characters, and inspirations from that game. The spin-off being more popular than the original, by the way, can you imagine? Like, did you know Bardock also grabs Mira in Dragon Ball Online the exact same way he grabs him in Xenoverse 2? But unlike Dragon Ball Online where he fails, in Xenoverse 2 he completely succeeds, and even gives us our first ever Super Saiyan 3 Bardock design, even before the Super Dragon Ball Heroes manga could do it. This shows how Xenoverse didn't just take from Dragon Ball Online, but completely replaced it to become Dragon Ball. Hello everyone, it's me, good Steve Doja here, back some more Dragon Ball Age 1000, and I want to talk about the game as well as some of the events obviously in Dragon Ball Online that get completely translated or transmuted into something completely different in the Xenoverse series. Again, a great example, as I already mentioned, the Bardock grabbing scene. I'll talk more about that later in full. I want to talk about some stuff that doesn't even exist in Xenoverse at all. For example, Mira destroying Planet Namek with a Spirit Bomb. That doesn't show up in Xenoverse's series at all at once. Mira doesn't even have Spirit Bomb on any of his 4 presets, so maybe they're going to save that for Age 1000. I feel like Mira and Towa are still going to come back again in the next game, because why not? They're already the super popular established Xenoverse villains. Hell, they're so popular, Mira and Towa for no reason show up in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. They have no right to be there. That game has nothing to do with Dragon Ball Online, has nothing to do with Xenoverse. They literally were just like, hey, what if there was a secret Towa and Mira boss fight in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot? That game is a DBZ game. It's in the title. I want to remind you guys, when Dragon Ball games are coming out, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, Dragon Ball Fighters, they don't have Z in their name anymore because they're not DBZ games. They cover all of Dragon Ball. But DBZ Kakarot is called Z Kakarot and still chose to add Towa and Mira. That's how popular they are. So most likely, yes, they will still show up in Age 1000 again. Even if it's convoluted, who cares? Maybe Fu brings his parents back at the end of Future Saga Chapter 4. I also want to talk more about Future Saga Chapter 4 because there's something else that reminded me that we still haven't had something explained to us specifically in Xenoverse 2 that they could easily use as the Future Saga Chapter 4 story. So that would be good. But without further ado, I wanted to talk fully about everything that we've actually kind of missed between the games. I talked about Mira so much first because Mira really is the most popular part of Xenoverse when it comes to the antagonists. Demigro's the main antagonist for the first game, but no one cares. Mira's way more influential because not only did he basically kick off the main events of the original game of Dragon Ball Online, but Mira shows up multiple times in history in Dragon Ball Online. I'm pretty sure the first time he shows up in Dragon Ball Online's history, unironically, is when Xenoverse starts, which I don't think is supposed to be some secret tie into Xenoverse. It's just a coincidence that around the time of 850, which 850 is when Xenoverse 1 happens, by the way, and then 852, I'm very sure, is when Xenoverse 2 occurs. Mira shows up in 850, and that's when he destroys Namek with the Spirit Bomb. Then in Age 1000, that's when the game actually starts and you can play your player character and fight him. So Mira's been alive for ages, and during all that time, never once did they explain that he's an android created by Towa. He's just a super duper strong guy. In fact, Towa's a different person entirely compared to Mira. She's just also a demon. She's probably going to be a lackey to him or something. Who knows? But in Xenoverse, it's obviously changed to be that they are allies instead. And when Mira shows up in 850 in Xenoverse 1, it's not to just destroy New Namek and beat up Namekians with his unique special army that only he made. No, him and Towa just go around corrupting people and obviously changing, existing bad guys into even badder guys and changing good guys into supervillains. We see supervillain Gohan, Vegeta, Yamcha. Yamcha's definitely one of the more popular ones. Hercule as well. We see supervillain versions of characters that were good and bad basically just show up and wreak havoc. Which reminds me, the time difference between 850 to 1000 might seem absolutely ridiculous to some of you guys, but that's just to establish that there's a lot going on in Dragon Ball's history. I should really talk about that time gap because that time gap is enormous. Now, an 150-year time gap is obviously massive, and it's not like this has escaped the devs of the game, obviously. I do want to remind you guys that the reason why they call it Age 1000 isn't just because, oh, well, 1000 is just a nice number. They obviously remember when Dragon Ball Online takes place. They're obviously trying to reference it heavily. Now, a lot of people are still saying it's not Xenoverse 3, it's Online 2, but I want to remind you guys that Xenoverse is basically just Dragon Ball Online, but if it succeeded. Obviously, they took the time way further back to make sure everyone's favorite characters are around because, they want the game to sell and all that stuff. But they obviously called the game Dragon Ball Online to be like, hey, guess which events are going to take place now. Obviously, very, very obviously, they're not going to take the risk of having Goku and Vegeta not show up in this game and be super separate from the story like they did in Dragon Ball Online originally. But they're going to keep everything closer together. The main reason why it takes place in Age 1000 is most likely to take advantage of all the new story beats, all the different customization that the characters can have, the timeline differences, And it's just a really cool marketing scheme, to be honest. Like, hey, what if Dragon Ball Online was back for real this time, rather than Xenoverse 2, which is basically like a spin-off, or the Xenoverse series is just a spin-off of Dragon Ball Online. But if the spin-off was more successful than the original, so now they're going to take more things from the original and apply it to the spin-off, because it's just that popular. I think more great examples of this would be games like, I don't know, Shin Megami Tensei is a good example, right? Isn't Persona more popular than Shin Megami Tensei? Someone correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I could have sworn they were part of like a similar series altogether. But Persona is now just infinitely more popular. Hell, we have 5 Persona games. Persona 5 Royale is like the most recent one, right? It's like a redo of... Can you see how popular a spin-off can get? That it just completely blows the original concept out of the water. Hell, even when it comes to Mario games, I'm gonna be real, Mario Kart has more sales than like the actual like mainline games. Obviously because, you know, family fun, multiplayer, all that good stuff. But Mario Kart is so popular that I swear to God, people look more forward to a new Mario Kart game, which was a big disappointment, than they do to mainline Mario games. Again, Mario Kart 8 was like a massive meme for just being milked forever, just like Xenoverse 2, until they eventually made the newest Mario game. Same thing basically with Xenoverse. People have been begging for a Xenoverse 3 for ages. And what did they do? They just kept giving more DLC support to Xenoverse 2. Sometimes spin-offs are just that colossally popular, but they basically completely usurp the original in popularity. And it gets to the point where they start just taking things and borrowing things from the original. It just happens with all franchises that have super popular spin-offs. So the same thing's happening here, right? I wouldn't even say Xenoverse is a spin-off anymore of Xenoverse. If anything, Xenoverse has forced itself to become the original, because now it's a prequel to Dragon Ball Online. And Dragon Ball Online basically isn't canon anymore, unless if Age 1000 gives us that new version of the timeline with all the new lore and all that stuff. Because again, stuff like Fu being born in Age 1000, so obviously Fu was born in Age 1000, and several years later when he became an adult, he went back to Xenoverse's timeline, but everyone knows adult Fu more than they know kid Fu. Like, people know adult Fu as their main version of Fu. Towa and Mira are 2 different like working entities in Age 1000, or I guess in the timeline Age 1000, but in Xenoverse's timeline, they're team-ups, like they're together. Towa is the scientist that created Mira, etc., right? Hell, there's even a moment in Dragon Ball Online where Bardock puts Mira in the same situation he puts him in Xenoverse 2. I want to remind you, not Xenoverse 1, Xenoverse 2, where he gets Mira in kind of like a full Nelson position. But in Dragon Ball Online originally, Bardock did it to hold off Mira, and so he could do a self-destruction attack. That doesn't do any damage to Mira, just slows him down so that way the good guys can obviously, you know, get away and, you know, fight another day. But in Xenoverse 2, Bardock takes him into, you know, a separate time space where, you know, he unlocks Super Saiyan 3 while he's fighting Mira. And then it's left up to, you know, the player if Bardock survives that, you know, time rift, or if he's out there fighting another day. Now, since Xenoverse 2 didn't develop on this story, there's a very high chance that this could come back in Future Saga Chapter 4, the same way how they brought back Future Gohan being alive in one of the more recent DLC packs. I do believe it's the same one that had, like, I think Pikkon and Toppo as DLC characters, because the first half of the DLC story is obviously, you know, dark, evil, like supervillain Toppo versus, you know, Super Saiyan Blue Evolved Vegeta. And then the second part is Future Gohan and Super Saiyan Blue Goku teaming up to fight Janemba. Remember, the story choices we made all the way back when the game came out, and voting that Gohan should, you know, survive his, you know, encounter with the androids. Like, we should jump in and save him rather than letting him die and let history, you know, go on the way it's supposed to. That allowed Gohan to obviously exist and, you know, fight another day alongside Blue Goku to help take over Janembas, like several years later in a future DLC pack. And the same way how that Bardock decision has never been followed up, and maybe more people voted that Bardock should pass away in the time space, but Bardock's super popular. I'm very sure the community voted for no, Bardock should come back. And even if people voted that Bardock shouldn't come back, you think Bandai Namco Dimps cares? They can milk Bardock, bro. So they're most likely either going to follow up with Bardock on the Future Saga Chapter 4 DLC, or maybe that will just be saved for Age 1000. Who knows? Because again, that event takes place during Dragon Ball Online, except in Xenoverse 2 it takes place 150 years earlier. So most likely Dragon Ball Online story, like I said, doesn't exist anymore, and has been entirely replaced with Xenoverse 2's version of the, you know, historical events. Obviously, for original online players, that's gotta kind of suck, because you basically just don't like have a story anymore. Like, lol XD, your story is now my story. But at the same time, Dragon Ball Online wasn't very playable in a lot of places. If I recall, the game wasn't even marketed mostly to Japan. It was marketed to places like China and Korea. And even then, the game was only in foreign languages and never came to the West. And the West, usually, I'm not saying the West carries Dragon Ball, but the West usually manages to gas up and glaze Dragon Ball games and make them more successful overseas than they would have originally been, just restricted to their mainland, right? That helps a lot. But Dragon Dragon Ball Online heavily restricted itself and had very weird marketing, and obviously made some decisions that people don't agree with. Like now, in hindsight, not having Goku and Vegeta around 24/7 would seem like a blessing, especially after they just take up all the screen time in Dragon Ball Super. But back then, when Dragon Ball Z just ended, like no, people wanted to see Goku and Vegeta and stuff like that. So that was a really weird thing for them to do, but that's the way it went, right? Dragon Ball Online failed. Xenoverse 2 rose from its ashes like a real phoenix, and unlike the last phoenix, Xenoverse 2 was able to fly, and it flew way beyond anyone's grasp. It's evolved to something entirely different now. Hell, you could even say it's a dragon now. It's just eternal. It's no longer gonna die and be reborn. It's just gonna stick around forever, and people will worship it and praise it. No matter how bad things get, people will be like, damn, Sparking Zero really ain't nothing compared to Xenoverse 2. You know, that's the situation we live in now when it comes to Xenoverse 2. It's really ascended beyond all merits, and honestly, I think that's a great place to end the video. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, Dragon Ball Age 1000. If you don't think that Age 1000 is a Xenoverse free game, sure, that's fine. But I do want to remind you guys, it's the same way that Raging Blast isn't called Tenkaichi free, even though it has almost the exact same art style and literally the exact same gameplay. So, not saying that Dragon Ball Age 1000 has to be called Xenoverse free. It could literally just be called something else, but we know what it is. It's taking place in the same timeline as the timeline that Xenoverse replaced, and that timeline wasn't financially viable, so there's no reason to try and reboot it. It's just obviously going to be a continuation of Xenoverse's story, even if they don't call it Xenoverse. I think we can all agree that that's an acceptable term, even if you don't want the game to be called Xenoverse free. But without further ado, that is a perfect place to end the video. Again, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like on the video. Don't forget to subscribe, as it greatly supports the channel, and leave a comment down below as to what you fellas would like to see next. Again, I do love you all. Hope you all enjoyed, gang, and I'll see you all next time. Take care and peace. Bye bye.